Hey guys, we know you love these long 20-story videos and we love the feedback we get. However, it takes a while for our small team to make them. That's why we've moved over to a new channel, Wideawakehorror Extended, just for our long stories with a bigger team, and we will be uploading the longer stories from that channel from now on. So guys, please head over to our new channel and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any new videos. The channel link will be in the video description and in the comments. Let's try and hit 1,000 subs on our new channel. I know you legends can get us there. And when we upload, comment that you're from the original Wide Awake Horror channel so we can appreciate you as one of the OG members. Thank you so much for being part of the Wide Awake Horror family. We hope to see you on our new channel. We love you guys.
I never thought I'd end up in a situation like this. I mean, I'm not some foolish girl who's gonna fall for some random guy on a dating app, right? But that's what I thought until everything started getting weird. This isn't one of those, oh, he didn't show up, how rude type stories. No, this is different. Much weirder. And I'm still not sure if I've fully processed it. So I matched with this guy, Trevor, a couple of weeks ago on one of those dating apps. He seemed totally normal, smart and funny, easy to talk to. His profile said he was into hiking and photography, which honestly, I thought was cool. He had a few pictures of him out in the woods with a camera, doing the whole adventurous guy vibe. Nothing seemed off, and we talked for a while before setting up a date. It wasn't anything fancy, just coffee at a little cafe downtown. A public place, you know. I'm not stupid. Safety first and all that. The day of the date, I was actually excited. I'd been talking to Trevor for a couple of weeks, and I liked his vibe. I didn't expect it to be anything too serious, but I thought it could be fun. He'd messaged me in the morning to confirm, so I was all set. I got to the cafe about 10 minutes early, grabbed a seat by the window, and ordered a coffee. I scanned the room for any sign of him, but nope, nothing. I'm pretty laid back, so I didn't freak out immediately. Maybe he was running late, right? I mean, it happens. So I just kept sipping my coffee and scrolling through my phone, trying to pass the time. An hour passed. I was starting to get a little annoyed, but it wasn't the end of the world. I figured maybe he had a last-minute thing pop up, or maybe he just wasn't interested anymore. But then I had a message from him. It was a weird one. Not exactly a sorry I'm late kind of message, but more like a cryptic, I see you. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke, but it made me uneasy. I looked up from my phone, scanning the cafe again. No Trevor. Nothing. Just people going about their business, none of them looking like the guy in his pictures. I messaged him back, asking if everything was okay, and I didn't hear anything for a while. I waited some more. About 10 minutes later, I got another message. This time, it just said, I'm close. I didn't know what to think. Was he just messing with me? Or was he really nearby, watching? I glanced around the cafe, but still, I couldn't spot anyone who even looked like him. It's not like I was looking for someone who would stand out, but the whole thing felt off. At that point, I was debating whether I should just leave. Then, I saw something that stopped me. Outside the cafe, across the street, there was a guy standing by a tree, just standing there. He was kind of hidden in the shadows, but I could make out his silhouette. I could feel my heart race, but I told myself it was nothing. People stand outside all the time, right? But then I noticed it, his posture. It was almost as if he was trying to make himself look like part of the environment, blending in with the shadows. I kept looking at him, and it hit me. He looked just like Trevor from his profile pictures. I couldn't be sure, but it definitely looked like him. I wanted to leave, I really did, but something kept me there. I guess part of me thought I was overreacting. So I sat there glued to my seat, pretending like everything was fine. The guy across the street didn't move. He didn't even seem to blink. I looked down at my phone again. Nothing from Trevor. After a few minutes, I gathered the courage to get up and head for the door. But as soon as I stood up, I got one last message from him. It said, I'm just behind you. I froze. I turned around, but the cafe door was still behind me, and no one was standing there. My stomach dropped. My heart was pounding in my chest. I kept trying to tell myself it was all in my head, that I was being paranoid, but then I saw it. The figure across the street was moving. Slowly, and almost like he was trying to make himself less obvious. I quickly pushed the door open and stepped outside, trying to act casual, but my mind was racing. I didn't even look back, just walked quickly down the street. My eyes flicked around, scanning for anything unusual. And there it was. The man across the street, Trevor, or whoever he was following me. Not running, not trying to catch up, but definitely keeping pace. I didn't stop walking. I don't know what came over me, but I was not about to let whatever this was get closer. I turned down a side street and walked faster, my breath getting shallow. I kept looking over my shoulder, but I didn't see him anymore. Maybe I lost him. Maybe he was still out there, but at that point, I didn't care. I went home, locked the door, and tried to forget about it. But the next day, when I checked my phone, Trevor's profile was gone, completely vanished. His account, his messages, everything. It was like he never existed. I searched the app again, but there was no trace of him. I started thinking about the other things that seemed off. The fact that his photos were all kind of vague. He was never facing the camera directly in any of them. That strange feeling I had when he messaged me the first time. The way he seemed to know exactly where I was without ever showing up. The figure watching me from across the street. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe it's all just a coincidence. But something about it still makes my skin crawl. To this day, I have no idea who Trevor really was. I don't even know if his name was really Trevor. All I know is I haven't seen him since. And honestly, I hope I never do.
Just a kind reminder that we will be uploading our longer 2-hour stories from a new channel called Wideawakehorror Extended. So please, if you haven't already, please head over and smash that subscribe button, just like you smashed the button on this channel. We really hope to see you there for the next upload. Enjoy the rest of the stories.
I'm still trying to figure out if I was just being paranoid or if something really weird happened to me. Honestly, I can't stop thinking about it. It's been a few months. It's like every time I close my eyes, I can see his face again. So I guess I'll just tell the story, and maybe it'll make more sense then. Or maybe it won't. But here goes. I met Cory on a dating app. You know the drill, right? A bunch of people swiping and messaging, hoping to find someone decent. His profile didn't seem that special at first, but I liked his vibe. He had a couple of cute pictures, one of him standing on a beach, another of him in a park with a dog. He looked like the kind of guy who'd be laid back and into nature, which was honestly refreshing compared to the usual gem selfies you see. His bio was simple, just a few lines about enjoying hiking, cooking, and being a genuine guy who liked to keep things real. Pretty standard, but I went with it. We started chatting, and he seemed cool. Nothing out of the ordinary. We talked about books, movies, random stuff. Nothing too deep, but enough to make me want to meet up. So we made plans to grab coffee at this local cafe one Saturday afternoon. When I got there, I was a little nervous, but I always get that way before meeting someone new. I had some awkward dates before, and I'm sure we've all had that feeling of, is this person going to be a total weirdo? I walked in, looked around, and didn't immediately spot him, so I figured I'd just wait a bit. And then about 10 minutes later, he walked in. I'd seen his profile pictures a million times, so I was expecting a certain look. But when I saw him, something felt off. He didn't look like the guy in the photos, not exactly. Don't get me wrong, he was still attractive, but there was something strange about him. His eyes were different, darker than in the pictures, and his face seemed a little more puffy. His hair was shorter than the photos showed, and his skin looked paler. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I tried to brush it off as maybe bad lighting or something, but I couldn't stop staring at him, and he definitely noticed. He smiled and walked over to the table. We sat down and started talking, but there was an underlying weirdness about him. The conversation was normal at first. Small talk, how's your day going stuff. But then things started to shift. Cory began talking about me, stuff I'd never told him. He mentioned the book I was reading, which I hadn't posted about anywhere, and definitely hadn't shared with him. I felt my stomach tighten. Then he said something about how my favorite cafe was just a few blocks away from my apartment, which was another thing I never told him. And it wasn't like he just guessed. He said it so casually, like he'd been there before, or at least knew exactly where it was. I tried to play it cool, but inside I was panicking. I didn't want to be rude, so I just nodded and changed the subject. But then it kept happening. He mentioned random details about my life that I definitely hadn't shared with him. Things like the fact that I have a scar on my knee from when I was little, or how I've been trying to pick up knitting recently. Little things that you didn't know someone you couldn't just guess. At this point, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't shake the feeling that this guy knew way too much about me. It wasn't like he was trying to be creepy or anything. He was just acting super casual about it, like it was no big deal. But the more he spoke, the more unsettled I felt. I couldn't handle it anymore. I made some excuse about needing to get going and said I had a lot to do. His face flickered for a second, but then he just smiled and said something like, "It was nice meeting you," and I left. I didn't even wait for him to walk me out or anything. I just bolted. I walked quickly, trying to keep calm, but I couldn't shake the weird feeling in my chest. As soon as I got home, I locked the door and sat on my couch, trying to process everything. And then, because I'm a glutton for punishment, I checked the app. Cory's profile had changed. It was subtle at first, but the pictures were different. I remembered that in one of his photos, he had been wearing a red jacket. Now that photo was gone, replaced with one where he was wearing a blue hoodie. But the weirdest part, the one picture I remember of him on the beach, it wasn't the same beach anymore. The background was completely different. The ocean, the sand, it all looked wrong. It was like a poorly photoshopped version of the original, but I couldn't quite place it. I stared at the screen for a long time. It felt like I was going crazy. I could have sworn his profile had been fine when I checked it earlier that day. I could have sworn the pictures had been exactly the same. But now, it was like they were subtly different, more off. I'm not the kind of person to believe in conspiracy theories or anything, but it hit me. What if he had been following me? What if he had been watching me before we met and I hadn't even known? I started to feel sick to my stomach. I blocked him on the app, even though I wasn't sure if that would actually do anything. And then I deleted the app entirely. I didn't want to deal with the stress of it anymore. For a few weeks after that, I kept thinking about him. I tried to convince myself I was just overreacting. Maybe he was just one of those people who did a little too much research on someone before meeting up. But the more I thought about it, the weirder it seemed. And now, months later, I still feel like I'm being watched sometimes. Every time I go to a cafe or walk by a park, I wonder if he's somewhere nearby. I haven't seen him again, and I haven't heard from him, but I still can't shake the feeling that something's not right. Maybe I'm just paranoid, or maybe I'm not. But I can't help thinking that Cory wasn't just some guy I met on a dating app. He knew too much about me, and I have no idea what he wanted. Okay, I'm not even sure where to start with this, but I feel like I need to get it off my chest. I don't know if I'm just being paranoid or if this was something seriously messed up. Either way, it's been haunting me for months. I can't seem to shake it. I'm hoping that talking about it will make it feel a little less weird, but I'm not sure. Anyway, here's what happened. It all started on a random Tuesday afternoon right after work. I was lying on the couch, scrolling through my dating app, yeah, I know, a bit of a habit, when I saw a message pop up from someone named Dan. I didn't recognize the name, but his face looked familiar, like someone I'd matched with months ago, but nothing ever really came of it. You know how it is. You match with a bunch of people, chat for a little bit, and then just kind of forget about it when you get bored or busy. But the weird thing, his profile was gone. Completely. I went to check it out, but there was no trace of it. Nothing. Just his name and my messages, and that was it. I stared at the screen for a second, trying to figure out if I just imagined him being there in the first place. But nope, the message was definitely real. So I opened it. It was simple at first, just something like, "Hey, I've been waiting for you." I thought maybe it was just some weird joke or a pickup line that didn't land, but something about it felt off. I remember thinking, why would he say that? We haven't even talked in months. But I shrugged it off. People send weird messages online all the time, right? Maybe he was just messing around. So I responded, and the conversation started kind of normal. He was asking me how I'd been, what I'd been up to, all that. But then a couple of messages in, it got weird again. He mentioned that he'd been watching me for weeks. At first, I thought it was just another creepy joke, like those people who say things like, "I've been watching you from across the room," or whatever. But this guy wasn't joking. His tone was way too serious. I felt uncomfortable, but I didn't want to make a big deal of it. I told him that I didn't think this was the kind of conversation I wanted to have, and I was about to just block him. But then the next message came in, and this one made me stop. It was just a single sentence. "I know where you live." I froze. I hadn't told him anything like that. We hadn't exchanged personal info or anything. My heart skipped a beat. At this point, I'm getting seriously weirded out, and I'm not sure if I should block him right away or keep talking to try and figure out what he was trying to say. I was probably being way too curious for my own good, but I started scrolling through the old messages we'd exchanged when we matched the first time. It wasn't much, just the typical small talk, and then we both sort of lost interest. But there was nothing in there that suggested he knew anything about me that I hadn't shared. I checked his profile again, just to see if I could get a better sense of who he was, but nothing. No pictures, no bio, no nothing. Just his name, and that's it. That felt wrong. How could he have messaged me if his profile didn't even exist anymore? That didn't make sense. That's when I started to feel like I might be losing it. Maybe I was overthinking it. So I just ignored him for a while, hoping he'd go away. But he didn't. Instead, he sent another message. This one said, "I've been following you for months now. You walk your dog at 7:30 every morning, right? I see you at the same coffee shop on Tuesdays." My blood ran cold. There was no way he could know that. I had never mentioned where I went or what time I walked my dog. I hadn't posted anything like that on social media. So how the hell did he know? I felt completely freaked out. I didn't know what to do, so I just blocked him. Then I spent the next few hours scrolling through my social media, looking for anything that could explain how he might know all this. I thought maybe I had posted something, but I couldn't find a single clue. My mind was racing and my skin felt like it was crawling. This guy had been watching me for months, and I hadn't even known. The next day, I was still shaken up, but I thought maybe it was just some weird coincidence. Maybe he was just a random creep who got lucky and found my social media or something. I tried to calm myself down, but then about a week later, something happened that made everything 100% real. I was going through my old dating app messages again, because I'm apparently a glutton for punishment. I noticed that there was a new notification from a different account. I opened it, and guess what? It was the same guy. This time, though, it wasn't a message. It was a new profile, but again, there were no pictures. Just his name in a single sentence. "You shouldn't have blocked me." I could feel the panic rising in my chest. I hadn't heard from him in days, and now he was back with an empty profile, like he was trying to start fresh. And then it hit me. His profile picture from the first time we matched. It was completely different now. It was a picture of my building from a distance, taken from across the street. It wasn't even a good picture, blurry and dark, but I could tell exactly where it was. I started shaking. I knew it was my building because I recognized the trees outside, the little park across the street, the corner of the street lamp that's always flickering. I blocked him again, but this time I didn't feel safe anymore. I deleted the app. I told a few of my friends what happened, and they tried to reassure me that I was probably just being paranoid, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't shake the thought that he'd been watching me for months, and that I'd never even known. To this day, I've never heard from him again, and I moved apartments shortly after that. It still messes with my head when I think about it. It's been a few months now, but I haven't been able to forget the feeling that someone was always watching me. So yeah, maybe I'm just being dramatic, but I don't think I'll ever use a dating app again. And I definitely don't think I'll ever feel comfortable walking my dog at 7:30 again. I just hope I never run into him. This is something I still can't fully wrap my head around, and it's been months now. I never thought I'd be sharing something like this, but the whole thing still haunts me, and I'm hoping that writing it down will finally get it out of my system. Maybe. I don't know. But here's what happened. So, a while back, I matched with this guy on a dating app. His name was Gordon. He looked pretty normal. Good looking, had a couple of decent pictures, nothing too weird or over the top. His profile said he liked hiking and photography, and he seemed chill, so we started chatting. At first, everything seemed pretty typical. He was funny, asked me about my favorite shows, my weekend plans, nothing out of the ordinary. I wasn't feeling a huge spark, but he seemed like someone I could talk to, so we decided to meet up for coffee. The plan was to meet at this cute cafe downtown. It's always busy, so I figured it'd be a good place to grab a quick drink and see if we had any real connection. I told him I'd be wearing a red jacket, which I thought was a harmless thing to mention. I like to keep it casual, no big expectations. So I got there about 10 minutes early, which is usual for me. I like to scope out the place before I meet someone, especially if it's a first date. I walked in, grabbed my coffee, and sat by the window so I could watch for him. I checked my phone just to make sure everything was set. Then I checked the app for his profile, and something felt off. His profile was gone. Completely, I tried to search for him again, but it was like he never existed. His name, his pictures, nothing. I wasn't totally freaked out yet, but it felt weird. He had messaged me earlier to confirm, so I figured maybe he had just deleted his account. But why would he delete it right before meeting me? I sat there for about 30 minutes, feeling a little awkward, and started to wonder if I was being stood up. Honestly, I wasn't sure how I felt about him in the first place, but the whole disappearing profile thing was starting to bug me. I thought about leaving, but I figured maybe he'd just show up late, and I didn't want to be rude. Then, as I was scrolling through my phone, I got a text. It was from an unknown number. The message simply said, "I'm here." It made me freeze. I looked up, scanning the room, but there was no one who looked like him. I thought maybe he had sent it as a joke, but as the seconds ticked by, I got more and more uncomfortable. A few minutes later, another message came through. "I see you sitting by the window." Now I started to feel like I was being watched. My heart started racing. I quickly glanced around the cafe, trying not to let anyone notice. There was no one in the room who was staring at me, but the feeling of being watched was intense. My mind started running wild with possibilities. Was this some kind of prank? Was it one of those guys who get off on scaring people, or was it something worse? I looked down at my phone and responded with just a simple question. "Who is this?" There was a long pause. Then another message came through. "I've been watching you for a while now. You're always at that little bookstore on Mondays, right? I saw you there last week." I couldn't breathe. He was right. I go to the same bookstore every Monday after work, but I never told anyone that. No one I know would know that, and I definitely hadn't posted about it on social media. That was the moment when I realized how seriously messed up this was. I suddenly felt a wave of panic hit me. I wasn't in danger, at least I didn't think I was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was tracking me. I stood up, grabbed my purse, and walked to the door, pretending everything was fine. I had to get out of there. But then, just as I reached for the door, another message came through. "Don't leave. I'm right behind you." I turned around quickly, my heart hammering in my chest. There was no one close enough to be right behind me, but I couldn't ignore the fact that I had no idea who this person was or how they knew where I was. I pushed the door open and stepped outside, hoping to lose him in the crowd, but the messages kept coming. "I saw you walk out the other day. You're always wearing that gray sweater when you go to work, right?" I froze. It was true. I wear that sweater a lot, but again, how did he know? How could he know these details about my life when I hadn't told anyone about them? I felt like I was losing control. I texted my friend immediately, telling her that something weird was going on and asking her to meet me at the cafe. I didn't care if she thought I was being paranoid. I needed someone with me. While I waited for her to arrive, I kept receiving messages. The unknown number seemed to know everything. He described where I parked my car, mentioned that I liked to get lunch at a little deli down the street, and even brought up the fact that I had been to the gym that morning. I had never talked about any of these things with him. Not once. By the time my friend arrived, I was visibly shaken. We sat together and I tried to act like everything was fine, but I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there watching me. The weirdest part, the text stopped for the rest of the day. I didn't hear from him again. But that didn't stop me from being terrified. The next few days were a blur of anxiety. I kept checking my phone, convinced that I'd hear from him again. But nothing. His number disappeared from my messages, and his profile stayed gone from the app. It was like he had vanished completely. Except, I'd never felt safe again. It's been months since that day, and I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I still check my surroundings when I walk down the street. Every time I see a man who seems to be paying too much attention to me, I feel my heart race. I haven't gone back to the cafe or the bookstore. And honestly, I haven't gone any other dates from dating apps since then. I don't know if it was just some sick joke or if he was really following me. I still don't know if he got so many details about my life. Maybe he was watching me from the shadows for weeks, or maybe it was all just a crazy coincidence. Either way, I don't think I'll ever feel truly safe again. And if you ever match with someone named Gordon on a dating app, I'd suggest you think twice before meeting up with him. I know this sounds dramatic, but I can't stop thinking about Spencer. And it's been months. I'm honestly not even sure where to start with this. But if you're reading this, I guess you should know, if someone seems too perfect online, it might just be because they've been watching you for way longer than you realize. It started on this dating app I've been on for a while. Nothing serious, mostly just chatting here and there. But I wasn't really expecting to find anyone who stuck. Then came Spencer. We matched and started talking, and from the first message, I was kind of hooked. He seemed perfect, smart, funny, into the same kind of music as me, loved hiking, and even had the same taste in books. His profile picture was a little on the too perfect side. He looked like a guy straight out of a magazine. I shrugged it off. It was online, right? People usually show their best selves, but his profile had a lot of details that made him seem real, genuine even. We chatted for a couple of weeks. Our conversations were effortless. He always knew what to say, and he was incredibly attentive. It was refreshing, honestly. I don't know what something about him felt right. Maybe I was just craving attention, I don't know. But the more we talked, the more we had in common, and he just seemed too good to be true. Eventually, we decided to meet. We agreed to meet at this cozy little cafe downtown, nothing too fancy. I remember I was nervous but excited. I got there early, sat down with my coffee, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Spencer walked in and I saw him right away. He looked exactly like his pictures, except maybe a little too put together. You know, the kind of guy that always looks perfect. Yeah, that was Spencer. But still, he was charming. We talked for a bit about the usual stuff. Work, hobbies, movies, and things were going well. I started to feel comfortable. Then, out of nowhere, he casually mentioned something about my ex. Not just any ex, though, the one ex. The one I hadn't talked about with anyone in a while. The one I hadn't posted about on social media. The one who was kind of a big deal in my life a couple of years ago. Spencer mentioned his name and I froze. My first thought was, okay, maybe he knows about him because we have mutual friends, right? But then Spencer went on to say things that no one could possibly know. He talked about details of my relationship I'd never shared. About how we'd broken up, how it had been hard for me, how I'd taken it hard at first but was getting better. It wasn't just vague stuff, it was specific. He knew about my favorite restaurant we used to go to, how I had a meltdown when we went there for the last time, and how I'd avoided it for months after the breakup. All of this he knew. It felt like my heart was about to jump out of my chest. I was trying to stay calm and act like everything was fine, but the whole situation felt off. I started looking around trying to figure out if maybe someone was playing a prank on me. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe he had stalked my Facebook or Instagram, or maybe we had mutual friends who had talked about my ex. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew way too much. The conversation kept going, but every time Spencer spoke, I felt I was being slowly suffocated. He started asking me about more personal stuff no one would normally ask on a first date. Things like where I had gone on my last vacation, what time I usually worked out, and even where I liked to shop. And it wasn't the casual, oh, what do you do for fun, type of questions. It was detailed. I didn't want to make a scene, but I started to feel like he was reading off a list of things I hadn't ever shared with him. I tried to change the subject, but he kept pushing. It felt like he was intentionally digging into my past, like he knew exactly what buttons to press to make me uncomfortable. But at the same time, he wasn't being rude or aggressive. He was just calm. Too calm. I found myself giving short answers, trying to avoid saying anything else that might confirm what I was starting to fear. The real kicker came when he looked at me, like really looked at me and said, I know you're still haunted by the way things ended with him, but you've gotten so much stronger since then. You've really changed. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. I could barely breathe. How the hell did he know that? He was right, of course. My breakup had been messy and had struggled for a long time. But it wasn't something I shared with people, especially not someone I had just met. Not to mention, how could he have known? He hadn't even been in my life back then. I'd never talked to him about it. I tried to recover from the shock, but inside, I was already planning my escape. I was done. I needed to get out of there. I made up an excuse about needing to leave for work early and quickly stood up to go. Spencer didn't try to stop me, but as I was walking out, I felt a chill down my spine. I looked back once more and saw him just sitting there, calmly sipping his coffee, not a care in the world. I didn't hear from him for a couple of days, which was honestly a relief. I blocked his number, deleted the app, and told a few of my friends about what had happened, but no one really understood how messed up it was. I couldn't stop thinking about Spencer and how he'd known things about my life that he shouldn't have known. The whole thing felt like some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. A week later, though, I started getting strange messages. They weren't from Spencer directly, but they were about him. I received texts and DMs from random accounts, new, anonymous profiles that seemed to know even more about me. My routines, the places I went, the things I like to do on weekends, the things I'd shared with Spencer in passing during our conversation. It hit me like a ton of bricks. He hadn't just been following me since we met. He had been following me long before that, and what's worse, he had been tracking me for months, maybe even years. He knew where I lived, the areas I frequented, the exact times I'd be in certain places. I don't know how he did it, but he did. I tried to ignore the messages, but the dread was overwhelming. Every time I left my apartment, I felt I was being watched. That's when I called the cops. I didn't have much evidence, but I showed them the messages. It couldn't do much, but they assured me they'd keep an eye out. Honestly, I don't know if it helped, but at least I felt like I was taking control again. The weirdest part. Spencer's social media accounts all disappeared. Every trace of him. His number, his profiles, gone. Vanished, like he had wiped himself off the face of the earth. But I knew he was out there somewhere, watching. I haven't seen him since that day, but every time I walk out the door, I wonder if he's still watching. I can't escape the feeling that Spencer is out there somewhere, waiting for me to slip up. So, yeah, if you ever meet a guy named Spencer online and he seems way too perfect, trust your instincts. It could be more than just a bad first date. I'm honestly still trying to wrap my head around what happened. It's one of those things you don't really believe until it's right in front of you, and even then you're left with this feeling like you're in some sort of messed up dream. But I have to tell someone, so here it goes. A couple of months ago, I matched with this guy on a dating app named Dom. At first, everything seemed normal. His profile was pretty standard, nothing too flashy or weird. He seemed chill, into the same hobbies, had a couple of nice pictures. You know, the usual. We started chatting, and honestly, we hit it off pretty quickly. I'm not the best at reading people online, but Dom felt, well, normal. But there was something that bugged me. Right when I saw his profile picture, I felt like I knew him. It wasn't just a he looks familiar kind of feeling. It was more like my brain couldn't quite place where I had seen him before. His face was just too familiar, you know. I couldn't stop staring at his pictures, trying to figure out why his face looked like something from my past. It wasn't like I thought he was a celebrity or something. I just knew I'd seen him before. So I did what anyone would do and Googled his name. Nothing came up, which wasn't surprising. He didn't have a huge online presence, but still the gut feeling kept gnawing at me. A few days later, we decided to meet in person. It was supposed to be a casual coffee date at this cafe I liked. We didn't make big plans, just wanted to see if there was any real chemistry. I was excited, but still the nagging feeling that I knew him didn't go away. When I showed up, Tom was already there, sitting at a table at a window. As soon as I saw him in person, it clicked. I felt a rush of recognition hit me so hard that it made me stop in my tracks for a second. I'd seen him before. I knew I had. The weird thing was I couldn't pinpoint where. It wasn't just the familiarity of his face. It was something deeper. It felt like he belonged in my past, but I had no idea why. We sat down and started chatting. It was nice at first. He was easy to talk to, and we had the same kind of humor. But the whole time, I kept staring at him, trying to figure it out. He didn't seem to notice how uncomfortable I was, or maybe he was just good at pretending he didn't. I mean, he was charming. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off. Then something happened that made everything click into place, and trust me, I wish it hadn't. We were talking about random stuff, our favorite places to travel, food, books, and he suddenly said something that sent a cold rush through me. He mentioned an ex of mine by name, an ex that I hadn't thought about in years. Now, I know what you're thinking. He might have seen photos of me with this ex online, or maybe he had heard me mention him casually in our earlier chats. But the thing was, he went into details. He didn't just mention the name. He talked about how we used to go to a certain bar every Friday night and how one time I'd gotten super drunk and ended up crying about how my ex didn't appreciate me. This was stuff I had only ever told close friends. Stuff I never ever put online. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. Maybe he knew more about me than I realized. He could have picked up on things from our conversation or even social media, even though I was pretty careful about what I posted. But no, this was different. This wasn't just surface level stuff. It felt like he knew me on a personal level, like he was recalling memories that were deeply private. I asked him how he knew about my ex, and that's when things got really weird. He didn't seem shocked at all. In fact, he just smiled and said something like, "Oh, someone sent me a photo of you, and I guess they thought we hit it off." My stomach dropped. The casualness in his voice, the way he mentioned it like it was no big deal, it freaked me out. I asked him who had sent him the photo, but he just shrugged it off, saying, "I'm not sure. It just thought we'd be a good match, I guess." That was it. No more details. No explanation. He didn't seem nervous or even slightly concerned that I might be freaking out. I was freaking out. Who would send him a photo of me? How did he even know about my past relationship? The whole situation felt like it was spiraling, but I didn't know how to get out of it without seeming rude. I was too stunned to even leave the cafe. We kept talking, but the whole time, I was just running through different scenarios in my head. Was he a stalker? Was he a doppelganger? I don't know, it was like some weird, twisted version of deja vu. I kept thinking how I met him before. Did I block it out? Is this guy some kind of sick joke? The rest of the date passed in a blur. I didn't feel relaxed at all. I kept glancing at him, thinking that somehow, some way, I was supposed to remember him. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't. He was just too familiar. When I left, I was still processing everything. My head was spinning. How could he look so much like someone I'd known, but not be that person? And why did he know so much about me? Was it a coincidence, or had someone really been following me for longer than I realized? The next few days were worse. I couldn't stop thinking about Dom. I kept going over the conversation, trying to figure out if I had missed something, if I had given him clues about my past that made it easier for him to manipulate me. I couldn't trust my own mind, but the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that something was wrong. I decided to check out his social media profiles again. At first, everything seemed normal, but then I noticed something strange. In one of his older posts, there was a picture of him standing at the exact same bar my ex and I used to go to. The same bar, the same angle, the same time of day. But I hadn't told him where it was, and I never mentioned it to him on the date. I stared at that picture for what felt like an eternity. My head was spinning. Was this a coincidence, or was he trying to mess with me? Had he been following me for longer than I thought? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I was in too deep. I had no idea who this guy really was. I ended up deleting all my dating app accounts and blocking his number. I'm still not sure if Dom was a weird coincidence, a crazy stalker, or something worse. Maybe a doppelganger sent to mess with me. But I do know one thing. I'll never forget that feeling of recognition, and I'll never know if I was just imagining it all, or if he's still out there watching. I haven't seen him since, but every time I walk into that bar or any other place from my past, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that maybe Dom, or someone like him, is still out there. I honestly don't know what to make of what happened. I've tried to tell myself it was just some weird coincidence, but the more I think about it, the creepier it feels. Maybe it was just a prank. Maybe I'm just paranoid, but after everything that happened, I'm not so sure anymore. So, here's the story. A few days ago, I matched with this guy on a dating app called Ethan. He seemed normal, maybe even a little too perfect at first, but I figured it was just one of those things. His profile was pretty straightforward, nothing weird or out of place. His pictures were decent, just a few of him hiking, hanging out with friends, the usual. His bio was simple: love the outdoors, good conversation, and a solid drink at the end of the week. We hit it off pretty quickly, which doesn't happen often for me. I mean, we shared a lot of the same interests: movies, hiking, coffee, even a few obscure books that I love. He was funny, and his messages were always thoughtful. Nothing about him made me feel uncomfortable, so after a few days of talking, we decided to meet up for drinks. We picked a bar in the city, one that was cozy and relaxed. Nothing fancy. I showed up on time, early, actually because I'm one of those people who hates being late. I got a drink, sat at a table by the window, and waited. The place was quiet, not too crowded, which was nice. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, just in case I missed his message or something. But after 30 minutes, nothing. I figured maybe he was running late. It happens, right? I'm not the type to freak out over little things, so I just pulled out my book and waited. An hour passed, still no word from him. At this point, I started getting a little annoyed. I mean, I could understand being late, but no text. Not even a "hey, I'm running behind." I gave him the benefit of the doubt, though, and waited for another 10 minutes. Still nothing. So I sent him a message. "Hey, you still coming?" I figured if he was just delayed, he'd let me know. Still no reply. That's when I started feeling weird. I kept refreshing the app, checking the conversation. Maybe something had happened to his phone, I thought. But then when I checked, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. His profile was gone. Gone like it had never existed. There was no trace of him at all. No profile, no pictures, no messages, nothing. I checked my messages with him again, and it was just blank. Like the entire conversation had been wiped from the app. I even tried searching for his name in the app's search bar. Nothing. I tried everything. I went through my messages from the last few days, checking to see if I had somehow missed something. But nope, there was no record of him anywhere. At this point, I started to freak out a little. Was I just being pranked? Had someone create a fake profile, make me waste my time and then delete it? I don't know, but the whole thing was starting to feel off. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but I had this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I didn't want to sit there thinking about it all night, so I left the bar and went home. I tried to shake off the weirdness, telling myself it was no big deal, that maybe I just misremembered some details or something. I took a shower, grabbed some dinner, and tried to distract myself by watching a show. But my mind kept wandering back to Ethan, his picture, the conversations we had, the fact that he just vanished. But the real kicker came the next day. I woke up to a text message. At first, I thought it was from a friend, but when I looked at the number, I realized I didn't recognize it. The message was simple. It just said, "I hope you liked your drink." That's it. No, "Hey, it's Ethan," no explanation. Just a weird, creepy message like someone knew exactly where I had been the night before. I felt my heart skip a beat. My first thought was that maybe it was some kind of joke, one of my friends messing with me or something, but then I realized I didn't recognize the number, and it didn't make sense. How would anyone know where I was the night before unless they were there? I immediately tried calling the number back, but when I dialed, I got an error message saying the number was disconnected. My mind was racing. Could it have been Ethan? But how could he have sent that message if his profile was gone? Could someone else have sent it? Maybe someone playing a prank. I don't know. I didn't have any answers, just this sick feeling in my stomach. The whole situation didn't make any sense. Why would someone go through the trouble of creating a fake profile, chatting with me for days, and then disappearing with no trace? And why would they send me that message? How did they even know where I was the night before? I tried to tell myself it was all just a coincidence, that maybe the number wasn't connected to him at all, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I spent the rest of the day checking my phone obsessively. I checked my location history, my social media, my email, anything that might explain what was going on, but there was nothing. I couldn't find anything linking that number to anyone I knew, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I felt stupid for letting myself get so caught up in this random guy on an app, but the whole thing just didn't feel like a normal situation. It's been a few days since then, and I still haven't heard from anyone. I haven't tried to contact the number again because I know it'll just lead nowhere. But honestly, every time I hear a notification or see a new message, my heart stops. I'm terrified that whoever did this is still out there watching me. Maybe it was just a weird prank, or maybe I'm overthinking it, but I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. If you ever match with someone on a dating app, and it feels too good to be true, if something doesn't add up, trust your gut. Maybe it's all innocent, or maybe it's something way more twisted than you could ever expect. But I've learned that sometimes people don't just disappear from your life. Sometimes they vanish without a trace, and when they do, it feels like you're being left with a hole where they used to be. I still can't explain what happened. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. But I need to get this off my chest because it's been haunting me, and I don't know who else to tell. It started about 2 weeks ago when I matched with this guy on a dating app named James. I don't know why, but from the very first message, there was something about him that seemed too perfect. He was funny, charming, the kind of guy who made you feel like you were the only person in the room. His profile was simple but solid. He loved dogs, liked hiking, had a sense of humor that didn't come off as forced, and seemed genuinely interested in the things I liked. We talked for a few days and things were going great. He asked questions that made me feel heard, but not in a creepy way. It wasn't like he was prying. He just wanted to know more about me, my favorite books, places I wanted to visit, all little things that you usually have to explain over time. By the end of the week, we decided to meet for coffee at a local cafe. Nothing fancy. Just a laid-back spot with good lats and comfy chairs. I was honestly excited, but also a little nervous. You never really know how things will go in person, right? But when I walked into the cafe, there he was, sitting by the window with a half-empty cup of coffee in front of him. He was exactly how he looked in his pictures. Dark hair, deep green eyes, and that easy smile that made you think he didn't have a care in the world. We hit it off immediately. I mean, It was one of those dates that you hear people talk about where everything just clicked. We talked about everything and nothing all at once. He made me laugh, which is rare for a first date, and he didn't make it awkward by talking about himself nonstop. Every time I mentioned something I liked or wanted to try, he was like, "Me too," or "That sounds amazing." He seemed too perfect, but in a good way, Like, for once, I wasn't thinking about the red flags I usually look for. I was just enjoying the moment. The weird thing was how familiar I felt with him. It's hard to explain, but it was like we had known each other for years, not just a few days of chatting. The vibe was so comfortable, and I felt like I could talk to him about anything. After a couple of hours, he asked if I wanted him to walk me home. I didn't even hesitate. There was something about him that made me feel completely safe, like I had known him all my life. So we left the cafe and started walking. It was a nice night, the streets were quiet, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. When I got home, he kissed me on the cheek and said goodnight, and I went inside. I was on cloud nine, honestly. It felt like something out of a movie, and I kept replaying the night in my head. He texted me when he got home, just a simple, "I had a great time tonight" message, which made me smile. The next day, I woke up with a weird feeling in my stomach. It wasn't dread, more like a weird sense of unease that I couldn't shake. I tried to brush it off, figuring it was just the post-date nerves everyone gets. But when I checked my phone, the first thing I noticed was that James' profile was gone. Like completely gone. Not just inactive, vanished. His messages were still in my inbox. When I went to click on his profile to look at his pictures again, I found nothing. There was no trace of him anywhere. I thought maybe he deleted his account or something, so I searched for him. Nothing. It was like he had never existed. I double-checked the messages and everything was normal, except that little voice in my head started whispering, "This isn't right." I couldn't explain why, but I just had this feeling that something wasn't adding up. I tried to reach out to him through text, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted a few more times, but got nothing back. I even tried calling his number, but it just rang and rang with no answer. And that's when I started to feel a bit crazy. It was like he had disappeared overnight, and I had no explanation. That's when I did something I really regret. I started asking around. I messaged a couple of my friends and even asked some mutual acquaintances if they knew anything about him. No one knew him. No one had ever heard of him. It was like he was some kind of ghost. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the whole situation felt wrong. I started thinking about the date, of how perfect it was, how easy everything had felt. It wasn't just the fact that his profile was gone. It was the whole thing. It was like everything had been too good to be true. The weirdest part happened a couple of days later, though. I was walking past the cafe where we had met up. I decided to stop in for a coffee. I mean, it was a place I liked anyway, so I didn't think much of it. When I walked in, the manager, someone I had seen there a few times, he gave me a weird look, then said something that made my blood run cold. "I've seen him come in here for years," she said, looking a little uncomfortable, "but he never orders the same thing twice. He always gets something different, depending on who's with him." I felt my heart stop. I had never mentioned James to the manager, and I didn't think I had ever seen her before. But she knew exactly who I was talking about. She didn't seem shocked or surprised that I was asking about him, just strangely calm, like this was a normal thing for her to say. I didn't know how to respond, but I just nodded and paid for my coffee, feeling my hands shake as I walked out of the cafe. At that point, I was seriously questioning my sanity. Was I just imagining everything? Or had I met someone who didn't even exist? Someone who just disappeared after making me feel like I was the only person in the world? I didn't know what to believe anymore. It's been over a week now, and I haven't heard from James, and I hadn't seen him anywhere. I've tried searching for him online, but there's nothing. No trace of him on social media. No trace of him in any news articles, nothing. It's like he never existed. It's like he was just a figment of my imagination, or worse, a ghost sent to mess with my mind. I still can't explain what happened. I don't know if he was real or if he was just some kind of weird illusion. But what I do know is that something about that night about him didn't feel right, and I can't shake the feeling that I'll never get answers. The whole thing is just wrong, and I don't know if I'll ever feel safe going into that cafe again. I still wonder if I was talking to a real person, or if he was something else entirely. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened. I don't know if I'm overreacting or if something way more sinister is going on, but I'm freaked out. It all started with a guy I met on a dating app, Tom. At first, he seemed perfect. We hit it off immediately. I mean, seriously, it felt like we had known each other for years. We exchanged texts for weeks, talking about everything from books to movies to our weirdest childhood memories. The more we chatted, the more I was convinced that this could be something real. We had plans to meet for dinner, and I was excited but also a little nervous. You know how it goes when you've been talking to someone online for a while. You're just hoping they're who they say they are, and that the chemistry will be the same in person. But when I walked into the restaurant and saw Tom sitting at the table, I immediately felt weird. Like I couldn't place it, but there was something about him that seemed familiar. It wasn't just his face. It wasn't like I had seen him somewhere, but I knew him somehow. I spent the whole dinner trying to figure out why he looked so familiar, but I couldn't put my finger on it. He looked like a mix of a few people I knew, but not enough to make me think it was a coincidence. As we were talking, he mentioned where he was from, a small remote village upstate. The kind of place you'd probably pass through if you were driving to a bigger town. It sounded charming, honestly. But then something hit me like a ton of bricks. Years ago, there had been a story about a woman who went missing in a village just like the one Tom mentioned. I remember the whole town was talking about it for months. They never found her, and the case went cold. The woman had been a close friend of a friend of mine. I wasn't super close to her, but I remember the details. I remember the way people talked about her disappearance. And when Tom casually mentioned his hometown, I couldn't help but Google it right there in the middle of dinner. I know it sounds rude, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was some kind of connection. The second I typed it in, my heart skipped a beat. His village was the same one where the woman had gone missing. I froze. I tried to act normal to keep the conversation going, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I didn't know if it was just a coincidence or if I was reading too much into it. But the whole time, I couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling in my stomach. Tom noticed I was distracted, and we started talking about his hometown more. He mentioned how beautiful the area was, how quiet it was, how much he missed it. And then, this is the part I can't get over, he kept pushing me to visit. He kept talking about how I'd love it, how it'd be the perfect place for a weekend getaway. He was practically insisting that I come with him. It felt off. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I started feeling really uncomfortable. Something about the whole thing just didn't sit right with me. At some point during the dinner, I made an excuse and decided to cut the night short. I told him I had an early morning, even though I didn't, but honestly, I needed to get away. I had that nagging feeling that I was missing something huge and I couldn't shake it. But Tom, being the polite guy he was, insisted on walking me home. I didn't want to seem rude, so I said okay, but the whole time, I felt like I was being watched. I know that sounds crazy, but I couldn't help it. As we walked through the streets, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something that wasn't there. I thought I heard footsteps behind us, but every time I turned around, there was no one. I tried to brush it off, but the unease grew stronger. When I finally got to my door, I thanked him for walking me home, but I couldn't get inside fast enough. The minute I shut the door, I locked it, and then I just stood there for a few minutes, trying to calm myself down. But the weirdness didn't end there. That night, I checked my phone to find a new number calling me. The number was unmarked, which always makes me uneasy. I figured it was just a telemarketer or something, but I don't know why I felt this strange urge to answer it. Maybe I was hoping it was Tom, explaining that he had just wanted to make sure I got home okay. But when I picked up, there was only heavy breathing on the other end. It wasn't just a little either. It was deep, like someone was right there, breathing into the phone. I hung up immediately, my heart pounding in my chest. I thought it could have just been some prank, but my gut told me it wasn't. I didn't even know how Tom would have gotten my number so quickly, considering I hadn't given it to him yet. But as soon as I could, I blocked the number and tried to shake it off. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence, right? I had gone on a bunch of dates before, and this kind of stuff didn't happen. But deep down, I knew that something was off. I couldn't ignore the feeling that Tom wasn't who he said he was. He knew too much about me already. He'd asked questions I hadn't answered directly, and he seemed to know exactly what to say to make me feel comfortable. It was all so perfect, too perfect, and I started to wonder if he'd been planning this for longer than I realized. The next day, I went online to check his profile again, just to see if he had posted anything new or maybe to get a sense of who he really was. But when I went to search for him, I couldn't find him anywhere. His account had been completely deleted. Not just gone inactive, but deleted, his messages, his pictures, its whole profile. It was like he had never existed in the first place. I tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid, but the pieces didn't add up. How had he vanished so quickly? Where had he gone? I tried searching for him on other platforms, but there was nothing. No Facebook, no Instagram, no Twitter. Nothing. That's when I started to feel like I was being followed again. Every time I walked down the street, I kept feeling like someone was behind me. I know that sounds dramatic, but I swear I saw the same face in passing cars, or when I turned down alleyways like someone was watching me. I don't know if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or if Tom really was out there stalking me. I still don't know what to think. I've blocked every number that's called me since that night, and I haven't heard from him again. But I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there watching. I don't know if he's just a creepy guy who got too obsessed with me, or if there's something darker going on. But I'll never forget how perfect everything seemed, and how quickly it all turned into something I can't explain. I don't think I'll ever go back to that town. I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything that happened. I can't tell if I'm being paranoid or if something seriously creepy went down. I just need to get it off my chest. This is something that happened to me a few weeks ago, and I still can't stop thinking about it. It all started with this guy I matched with on a dating app. His name was Lucas. I'd been on dating apps for a while, and while most of my matches were pretty standard, small talk about coffee preferences or what kind of music we liked, Lucas was different. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, and the more we chatted, the more it felt like we had a lot in common. We swapped stories about our childhoods, talked about our favorite movies, and even shared book recommendations. For a minute, I actually thought I might have met someone who was, well, normal. He seemed funny, charming, and everything seemed perfect. But then one night, everything changed. We were chatting like we always did when he sent a text that completely threw me off. I'll never forget it. Out of nowhere, he said, "I've been in your room before." I was taken aback. I sat there staring at the text, trying to make sense of it. I didn't recognize his name, and the whole thing sounded insane. I just sat there for a second, hoping it was some sort of bad joke. But no, he doubled down and said, "I saw you once. You were sleeping." My heart dropped into my stomach. What the hell was going on? I had no idea who this guy was, but I instantly felt like my whole world was being turned upside down. Was he messing with me? Did he somehow have a way of getting into my apartment? Was this some sort of twisted prank? I typed out a response, but nothing came out. I sat there in complete shock, staring at my phone. The words he had sent me kept replaying in my head. "I saw you once. You were sleeping." How did he know where I lived? And why would he say something so unsettling? I started thinking back to a few months ago. I remembered that the building I lived in had been doing some routine maintenance. A few workers came by to fix things here and there, leaking pipes, faulty wiring, stuff like that. I didn't pay much attention to any of them, but one guy in particular stood out. He was this older guy, probably in his mid-40s, with a heavy accent. I didn't think much of him at the time, but I did remember that he knocked on my door once when I was home. He said he needed to check something in my apartment. Something about the wiring in the bathroom, I think. I didn't feel unsafe at the time, but I remember he lingered a little longer than he should have. I figured he was just being friendly, but now that I thought about it, something about that moment felt off. Could it have been him? Was Lucas the same guy who had come to my apartment? I don't know how he would have known which apartment was mine, or how he would have gotten my number. But now the pieces were starting to connect. He could have gotten my details through the maintenance request, or maybe from the building's management. I had no idea. I quickly checked his profile on the dating app, but the whole thing was empty. His pictures, his bio, everything was gone. It was like he had disappeared from the app altogether. It wasn't the first time someone had deleted their profile after talking for a while, but the timing of it felt strange. Why would he just vanish like that after sending me something so disturbing? At that point, I was totally freaked out. I went back to the messages, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain what's happening. But all I could see was that same text. "I can't wait to see you again." And then a bunch of other texts followed, but they were all about how much he couldn't wait to meet in person, how he was counting down the days until we could finally hang out. The messages were practically love bombing me, but now it felt like a trap. I immediately deleted the app. I didn't want to hear from him again. The whole thing felt so wrong, like I was being stalked or played with in some twisted game. But it didn't end there. Later that night, I got a text from an unmarked number. I didn't recognize it at first. When I opened the message, it was from Lucas. He said, "I hope you liked your sleep." I froze. I didn't know how he could have known what time I went to bed, but it freaked me out. I felt like I was being hunted. I tried calling the number, but it was disconnected. There was no way to trace it. My brain was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I blocked the number immediately, but still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something I didn't. What if he had been watching me this whole time? What if he was still out there somewhere, just waiting for me to make a mistake? I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. Every time I'm home alone, I keep checking the locks on the doors. I'd even started checking the windows more often, making sure everything is secure. I never used to be paranoid, but now I feel like I can't trust anything. It feels like he knows my every move, like he's somehow always there, even when I'm not aware of it. I haven't heard from him since I blocked the number, but I keep expecting it. I keep wondering if I'm going to bump into him one day on the street or at the grocery store. Maybe he'll be right behind me watching. I just don't know. I haven't told anyone about what happened because I'm not sure they believe me. And maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this than I understand. What if it wasn't just a weird coincidence? What if there's something darker going on? I don't think I'll ever use dating apps again. I don't trust anyone anymore. And I definitely don't feel safe in my own home. I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything that happened. I've told a few friends about it, but they just laugh and say I'm being paranoid. But honestly, I feel like I'm losing my mind. This all started about 2 weeks ago when I matched with a girl named Clara on a dating app. At first, things seemed pretty normal. We bonded over a shared love for old movies, photography, and those quiet moments you find in between the frames of a film. It was a kind of easy conversation you have with someone who just gets you. She had these vintage photos on her profile, mostly black and white shots of old movie stars and street scenes, which immediately caught my eye. We talked about photography for hours and swapped opinions on the best classic films. We decided to meet up at a local cafe. It was a cozy little place, one of those old school joints with mismatched furniture and dim lighting. I remember walking in, looking around for her, and feeling pretty excited. I talked to her every day for almost a week. She seemed cool. Different from the usual people I've met on dating apps. It felt like it had a real vibe, something more genuine. But when I saw her sitting there, my stomach sank. I wasn't sure if it was just nerves or if something else was off, but she didn't look like the woman in the photos. Her face seemed wrong. I could have sworn her eyes were different, or maybe it was her hair, but everything about her was shifting in this strange way. Every time I blinked, her face seemed to change just a little bit. Nothing major, just enough to make me feel disoriented. I chalked it up to maybe not getting enough sleep or just the nerves of meeting someone new. I sat down, tried to play it cool, and ordered a coffee. But it didn't stop there. Every time I looked at her, it was like her face was slipping in and out of focus. It was subtle, almost like some weird optical illusion. One moment she looked like she had a sharp jawline, the next it would soften. Her eyes wouldn't hold their shape, like I couldn't focus on them. I kept trying to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe she had some makeup on or a filter in the pictures, or maybe my eyes were just tired. Still, it didn't make sense. I kept blinking, trying to adjust, but the more I tried to focus, the stranger it became. And then, this was the point where everything felt like it was tipping into something I couldn't explain. Her expression seemed to flicker. It wasn't like someone changing their mood. It was more like her face was cycling through different emotions, like a glitch. One second she'd look happy, and she'd look sad. Then her smile would stretch too wide, and then suddenly it'd freeze for a second. I couldn't handle it anymore. My head was spinning. I stood up, mumbling something about needing air, and just left. I could feel her eyes following me as I walked out, but when I turned around, she wasn't even looking at me anymore. She was looking at the window like something had distracted her. I don't know why that detail stuck with me, but it did. I went home that night and tried to shake off what had happened, but it kept bothering me. I couldn't stop thinking about her, or more like, I couldn't stop thinking about how she kept changing. Something about that felt wrong. I needed to get some clarity, so I opened the dating app again to look at her profile. And this is where it gets even weirder. Her profile was gone. Completely. Not just the usual disappearing act that happens when people delete or deactivate their accounts. It was like it had never been there. No trace. I figured maybe she'd blocked me or something. So I searched for her name, but nothing came up. I even tried searching through the usual filters, location, age. Nothing. It was like Clara didn't exist anymore. But here's the thing. I still had her old pictures in my mind, the ones from her profile. They weren't just burned into my memory, though. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see them. It wasn't a memory, but more like an imprint. So I scrolled through the app just to check if I could find something, anything, that might explain it. And here's the kicker. Her pictures started shifting. The photos that had been on her profile before, her vintage shots, were cycling through people. Not just other women, but strangers, people I didn't know. The face that had been Claire's was now someone else's. Every time I blinked, the person in the photo would shift. 1 second it would be Clara, then it would be another woman entirely, then a guy, then someone who looked nothing like either of them. I couldn't even make sense of it. It was like her entire existence had become this shapeless, shifting thing with no real identity. I felt nauseous, like I was being pulled into something I didn't understand. I kept blinking, thinking it would stop, but it didn't. The app was glitching, showing me different versions of the same profile. No, the same person, but none of them were real. It was like Clara had never existed in the first place. I don't know what happened. I deleted the app and blocked everything just to feel safe, but it didn't feel like it had ended. I could still see those shifting faces in my mind, even now. Sometimes when I'm on my phone, I swear I see something in the corner of my eye, a face that doesn't belong, staring out of my screen. Maybe it's just me going crazy. Maybe it was all just some glitch, or maybe Clara wasn't real to begin with. I don't know, but I haven't opened that app since. Something tells me I won't ever be able to forget what happened. And honestly, I'm not sure if I want to know what was really going on. I haven't heard from her since, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I feel like I'm being watched. And I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there somewhere changing. So I still don't really know what happened or how it all went so sideways. I'm still kind of rattled by it, and the more I think about it, the more it feels like some kind of weird bad dream that I can't wake up from. It started pretty harmlessly though. At least I thought it did. I've been using this new dating app for a few weeks, one of those ones that promises to match you with people based on deep compatibility using a super advanced algorithm. They said it would be different from the usual apps because it wasn't just about looks or quick likes. It was about really knowing someone. I mean, it sounded promising, right? You answer a bunch of questions about yourself, your past, your family, and what you want in a partner. The app then analyzes all this data and tells you who's your perfect match based on stuff that's way deeper than your usual swipes. Honestly, I was intrigued, but I didn't think much of it. That's when I matched with Nina. Her profile didn't stand out at first, but there was something about her that felt right. The conversations we had were easy and natural, but also super in-depth from the start. She'd asked me about my childhood, about memories I hadn't even thought about in years. It was like she already knew the things I cared about without me having to say much. But I thought, hey, maybe she just has a knack for a good conversation, so I went with it. We started talking more and more. It wasn't just about movies or hobbies. She'd ask about my family, my old friends, things I hadn't really discussed with anyone in a long time. She seemed to know exactly what I wanted in a partner, not just the superficial stuff, but the deeper qualities like trust, empathy, the way I wanted to feel supported. It felt a little strange, but flattering too, so I didn't think much of it. Eventually, we decided to meet up for a date at a small cafe near my place. The place was cozy, not too crowded. When I saw her, I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked exactly like her pictures, but there was something about her presence that made me feel off. It wasn't anything obvious, but there was this underlying sense of familiarity, like I already knew of her in some weird, unsettling way. It kind of threw me off, but I chalked it up to my nerves. We sat down, and everything seemed fine at first. We talked about the usual stuff, work, the weather, how long we'd been on the app. But as the conversation went on, she started saying things that stopped me cold. She mentioned my last relationship, how I had broken up with someone I'd been seeing for almost a year. I didn't even tell her that much. I hadn't mentioned the breakup, the relationship, or even the person I'd been with, but she knew all the details, how it ended, the reasons I was hesitant to get back into something serious, even how it had taken me months to finally feel like I was moving on. I tried to laugh it off at first. Maybe she'd seen a post or something on social media. But then she started talking about my family. She named my sister, mentioned my parents, even recalled a specific family event from years ago. I didn't talk about my family much, especially not with someone I just met online. And here she was casually mentioning things I'd never shared with anyone. Things that were deeply personal. I froze for a second, trying to figure out how she could know all of this. The more she spoke, the more unsettled I became. It was like she was reading me, not just through the app's questions, but in ways that went deeper than what I thought was possible. She knew about my best friend's wedding I'd gone to last summer, the old photos I kept on my bookshelf, my first job, my biggest fear. Every word out of her mouth was a new detail that felt like it shouldn't have been public knowledge. How did she know this stuff? I started to feel like the walls were closing in on me. My gut told me to leave, but I didn't want to make a scene. I tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but she would circle right back to something that felt way too personal. At that point, I couldn't take any more. I made an excuse about needing to head home early and cut the day short. As I walked out of the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that she was watching me from the shadows. That night, I tried to forget about everything. I blocked her number, deleted the app, and even went as far as to erase all the conversations we'd had. I needed a clean break, but when I opened the app again the next day, things took a turn for the worse. Her profile was gone. No trace of Nina anywhere. At first, I thought she might have deleted her account, but when I searched for her name, it didn't come up at all. It was like she had vanished. But that wasn't the strangest part. I went through my messages to make sure I had blocked her correctly, but something was wrong. The app had an activity log showing all my past conversations. When I looked back, the conversation with Nina was still there, but there were changes. The details she'd shared, the information she'd known about me, wasn't just from our chats. It was written in the conversation like it had been pulled from somewhere else, and the app kept suggesting new matches for me. But here's the kicker. They were all people who seemed to know things about me that I never told anyone. I went into the app's settings trying to find an explanation, and that's when I saw the terms and conditions I should have read more carefully. The app's algorithm didn't just match people based on profiles and preferences. It had access to everything. Every private conversation, every interaction, every word typed, and it used that data to optimize your matches. In simple terms, it was tracking everything I said, selling that information to other users to make more accurate matches. Nina wasn't just some freaky coincidence. She was a product of the app, using my personal history to align with my every thought. I'm still trying to process what happened. I've deleted every trace of the app, and I haven't gone back to dating since. But sometimes I feel like I'm still being watched, like the app is still tracking me in some way, even though I stopped using it. The worst part is I can't stop thinking about Nina and how she knew everything about me. I don't know if she was just another user or if she was part of something much bigger. Either way, I don't let her want to find out. So I've been debating whether or not to share this story because honestly, I'm still freaked out by it. It happened a few months ago, and I don't really know how to explain it. It's one of those things where when I try to tell someone, it sounds too insane to be real. But it was real. It all started when I matched with a woman named Eva on this new dating app that promised to connect people based on shared experiences and memories. I wasn't expecting anything special, but we really hit it off. We started talking about everything. Childhood memories, places we wanted to visit, our favorite movies, you name it. It was one of those conversations where it felt like we were talking for hours, even though it had only been a couple of days. It wasn't the usual small talk. It was deep, and I liked it. Eva seemed really down to earth, smart, and she had a great sense of humor. There was a bit of a spark from the beginning, which is rare for me. I'm not really the type to jump into things, but with her, everything felt easy. The day before our first date, though, something weird happened. I woke up to a message from her that made my stomach drop a little. It was just one sentence, but it left me feeling confused. I can't wait to finally meet you after all these years. Now, at first, I didn't know what to make of it. We'd only been talking for a few days, so the after all these years part felt a little strange. I figured maybe it was a typo or some kind of inside joke I wasn't getting, so I asked her what she meant. I was half expecting her to laugh it off or give some cute response, but instead, she sent me something that totally caught me off guard. A photo. The photo was of us as kids at some summer camp. Together. I stared at the image for a while, trying to place where I had seen it before. The camp was this old one from when I was around 10 years old. But I didn't recognize the girl in the photo at all. She looked like Eva, sure, but I didn't remember ever meeting her. And even weirder, I had no recollection of that moment. The photo looked like it had been taken in the middle of some activity we were doing at camp, but I didn't remember it. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that maybe Eva had sent the wrong photo by accident. but deep down, something felt off. I kept looking at the picture, trying to remember, but it didn't click. Then I started to feel like my mind was playing tricks on me, so I decided to do some digging. I wanted to know more about her, and well, maybe I just wanted to figure out if this was a weird coincidence or something else entirely. I couldn't find any information on her that matched the picture she sent me. It wasn't like I thought she was lying about her identity, but it didn't make sense. I looked through her profile on the app again and started scanning her social media accounts, trying to connect the dots, but I didn't see anything that made it click. She didn't mention the camp or anything that might explain how we could have known each other from back then. The real kicker, though, came when I decided to ask her about the picture, the one she sent. I wanted to be polite, so I didn't outright accuse her of anything, but I asked her if she was sure that it was us in the photo. I was hoping she could explain it, or maybe she recognized that I didn't remember her, and we could laugh it off. Instead, she responded by sending the exact same photo, but with a slight change. There were more people in the picture now. Some other random guys I didn't recognize, looking like they were part of the same group, all smiling and posing like it was some big group picture. I couldn't understand it. Why had the picture changed? I started to get anxious. Was she messing with me? Why would she send a picture of us as kids if she didn't actually know me? And why had the image changed when I asked about it? I tried to do a reverse image search, thinking maybe she was using someone else's photo, but everything I found led to dead ends. The picture wasn't anywhere else online. Then, as if things couldn't get weirder, I started noticing something strange when I'd scroll through my old messages with her. I kept seeing small details that didn't add up. She would reference things that I knew I hadn't told her about, details of my life that weren't public. For example, she mentioned a time I had broken my leg when I was 16. I never mentioned that to anyone, let alone her. I tried to call her out on it, but when I asked how she knew about that incident, she dodged the question with some vague answer about how we must have talked about it before. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, but I still wasn't ready to completely let it go. The next day, I decided to look at her profile one last time. But this time, when I logged into the app, something was different. Her profile was gone, completely erased, no traces of her at all. The conversations we'd had, gone. All of it wiped. I even checked to see if I had accidentally unfriended her or something, but nope. She didn't exist on the app anymore. At this point, I started to get really paranoid. I looked up the camp we had supposedly gone to, but there were no photos matching the one Eva sent me. No record of a camp photo that even remotely resembled the one she had shared. I took a break from the app, hoping it would all just go away. But the next time I logged in, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The same photo she had sent me, the one from the camp, was being used by other people on the app. But they weren't her. They were different people, different names, different accounts. It was as if she had been using that same photo to connect with other guys, just like she did with me. I deleted the app after that. I've been trying to block it all out, but I can't shake the feeling that I was talking to someone who knew me from my past, someone I don't remember. I don't know what's going on, I don't want to know. But every time I close my eyes, I can still see that photo of us as kids, and it haunts me. Why did she send it to me? How could she know all those details? And why did she vanish without a trace? It's one of those things I'll never fully understand, but I just hope I never run into her again. Okay, this is something I never thought I'd be writing down, but after what happened, I just need to get it off my chest. It all started on a random Tuesday when I matched with a woman named Isabel on this dating app. We had a great conversation right from the get-go, talking about everything from favorite TV shows to obscure hobbies we both enjoyed. It was one of those connections where the conversation flows effortlessly, and I felt I could talk to her for hours. It didn't take long before we decided to plan an actual date. We picked a cafe near my place, somewhere casual but nice enough to get to know each other. We were both excited about it. The night before the date, I was winding down from work when my phone buzzed with a call. I didn't recognize the number, but I picked it up anyway. It was Isabel's voice on the other end. Now, here's the thing. I hadn't given her my number. We'd only been messaging through the app. So when she said she was just calling to check in, I was a little confused, but I figured maybe she had found my number somehow through mutual friends or something, so I didn't make a big deal out of it. We chatted for a minute or two, nothing unusual, until she suddenly got a bit more intense. She started asking more personal questions, ones that seemed a little too forward for someone I hadn't even met in person yet. I brushed it off as nervous excitement. It's pretty common to feel that way before meeting someone. But then, as the night wore on, I started getting text after text from her, all of them saying things like, "I can't wait to see you tomorrow," and "I've been thinking about you all day." The messages were weirdly clingy for someone I had just met online, but I was still willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. By the time it hit midnight, I was feeling a little weirded out. The texts were becoming a little more erratic, like she was spiraling into this odd desperation. Then the phone call started again. I didn't pick up at first, but the phone just kept ringing. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't like she was being aggressive, but something about her persistence felt off. So I sent a text back, saying that I was about to sleep and we'd catch up tomorrow, just to calm things down. That seemed to settle her down, but then, just as I was about to fall asleep, another call came in. And this time, I actually picked it up. She sounded almost frantic on the phone, like she was trying to say something but couldn't get the words out. I didn't know what to make of it. Honestly, I was a bit freaked out, but I didn't want to be rude or overreact, so I kept things polite and told her I was looking forward to seeing her the next day. The call ended, and I went to bed, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. When I woke up the next day, my phone was full of texts from her, most of them saying things like, "I feel like I already know you, and I've been waiting for this for so long." They were sweet in a way, but there was also something that made my stomach turn. It felt like she was crossing boundaries I didn't even know existed. I tried to ignore it, though. I told myself it was probably just nerves and that she was just really excited. We'd all get a little carried away sometimes, right? I met her at the cafe later that afternoon. She was already sitting at a table when I walked in, and I spotted her right away. But here's where it gets weird. The woman sitting across from me wasn't the same person in the photos. Not at all. Don't get me wrong. She looked similar to the photos. The hair, the eyes, the smile. It was all almost the same. But something was off. Her face was just different, like the version of her I had been talking to didn't quite match the person sitting in front of me. It was subtle at first, like I couldn't focus on her face long enough to get a good look. But when I tried to make eye contact, it felt like I couldn't quite get my bearings. Like I was seeing her, but at the same time I wasn't. Her eyes were different every time I blinked. I kept thinking maybe I was just tired or maybe I was just overthinking it. So I tried to push past the weird feeling and focus on the conversation. But then, as we started talking, it hit me. She was saying things that made no sense. Like, she was talking about stuff in my life that we never discussed. Personal stuff, things I never mentioned. Things that only a close friend or family member would know. At first, I thought maybe she'd gotten some information off my social media accounts, but as the conversation went on, I realized she was saying things that even I didn't know she could know. I was starting to feel uncomfortable, so I made an excuse about needing to leave. She didn't fight it. She just gave me this smile that was way too calm for the situation. We both left the cafe, and I figured I could just write it off as a bad date. Maybe she was a little too clingy for my taste, but at least I could go home and forget about it. Except when I checked my phone after I got home, something was wrong. All the messages, all the calls from last night, everything. Gone. I didn't even have any records of our text exchanges or the phone calls. It was as if they never happened at all. The weirdest part was that even the message I had sent her, telling her I was about to sleep, was erased. At first, I thought I was just imagining things, but no, I checked and rechecked. All the messages were completely gone. I couldn't find her profile in the app either. It was like she had vanished completely. The whole thing still haunts me. I can't figure it out. Why would she delete everything? Why was she acting so strange? And who was the woman I actually met at the cafe? She wasn't who I thought she was. I haven't been able to shake that feeling. And every time I look at my phone, I feel like I'm being watched or followed. It's like I'm living in a bad dream that I can't wake up from. So yeah, that's what happened. I don't know what it all means, but I do know one thing. I'll never be using a dating app again. Alright, I still can't wrap my head around what happened. I've gone over it 100 times, trying to make sense of everything, but it just doesn't add up. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if something really messed up happened. All I know is I'll never use a dating app again after this. So here's how it started. A few days ago, I matched with a woman named Nora on a dating app. Her profile was pretty standard, but her pictures were nice. Nothing too over the top, just normal and pretty in a way that made her seem approachable. We started talking, and for the first few days, everything was fine. We swapped stories about our favorite books, movies, and childhood memories. Normal stuff. She seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. I was feeling the same. By the time we were a few days into our conversation, we decided to meet up for dinner at a local place I like. Nothing fancy, just a casual place with good food. But then, the night of the date, things took a weird turn. It started with her texts. We'd been talking all day, but about an hour before I was supposed to meet her, she started sending these strange messages. At first, it was small stuff, like commenting on how excited she was to finally meet me in person. But then she began to talk about things I'd never told her. For example, she mentioned how she knew where my apartment was. I hadn't mentioned it in any of our conversations, not once. She even mentioned the exact street I lived on. At first, I thought maybe I'd said something in passing and just forgot, but the more I thought about it, the weirder it got. Then she started talking about my childhood, stuff like the town I grew up in, the school I went to, and even the first job I had. All of this was stuff I had never mentioned to her. It was like she knew way too much about me for someone I'd only been talking to for a few days. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling that something wasn't right started to settle in. I thought maybe she was just being super perceptive, or maybe she had somehow Googled me, though I couldn't figure out how she could have found all of that personal info so quickly. Still, I told myself to relax. I wasn't going to cancel the date over something that could be a coincidence. So I got to the restaurant early. I was already feeling a little off, but I figured I'd see how things went once we were in person. I waited for about 20 minutes before I got a text from her saying she was running late. No big deal. Stuff happens. But here's the weird part. About 10 minutes later, I checked my phone and her profile was gone. Completely gone. The messages we'd been exchanging were still there, but her profile. It was like it had vanished into thin air. No name, no photo, nothing. It was just a blank profile. I thought maybe it was a glitch, but when I tried to search for her again, I couldn't find anything. No profile. Nothing. Like she never existed at all. I thought I was going crazy. I even tried looking up her name through the app's search feature. I was starting to get anxious, but there was still nothing. I felt unsettled. I tried to convince myself it was just some technical issue or maybe a mistake with the app. But the fact that I couldn't even find her profile anymore, that was freaky. And even though I was sitting in the restaurant waiting for her to show up, part of me started to think she might never show up at all. After about an hour of waiting and feeling more and more uncomfortable, I decided to leave. It was getting late, and I hadn't heard from her since she said she was running late, which was just weird. So I went home, my head spinning. What the hell had just happened? When I got back to my apartment, I tried to relax. I'd eaten a little and had some drinks, so I figured I'd go to bed and forget about the whole thing. But as I was about to drift off, I heard something. A faint knocking on the door. I figured it was just my neighbor or someone else, so I ignored it at first. But then it came again, louder this time. 3 knocks followed by a pause, then 3 more. My heart started racing. I didn't know who it could be. I didn't remember any deliveries or visitors, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I stood still for a moment, just listening, then slowly walked over to the door and peered through the peephole. No one was there, just the hallway. I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it or if it was some weird prank, but the knocking continued. I felt a rush of unease as I backed away from the door, locking it for extra measure. That was when I remembered Nora's profile had disappeared earlier. My stomach dropped. I couldn't stop thinking about her strange knowledge of my life, her disappearance, and now this knocking. It felt like it couldn't all be a coincidence. I wasn't ready to believe it, but I knew I had to check again. I went back to the dating app. When I opened it, I looked up her name, hoping to see anything. But there was nothing. No trace of her. It was like she had completely wiped herself from existence. I thought I might be losing my mind. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how strange everything had been. I'd never given her my phone number. I never told her my childhood town or anything that she could have used to track me down. And yet it felt like she had some deep access to my life that I couldn't explain. The knocking stopped after a few minutes, but I didn't feel safe at all. I stayed up the rest of the night, watching the door and checking the peephole every few minutes, half expecting someone to be there. I'd never heard another knock, but I also never felt completely alone. The whole thing left me feeling like I was being watched, like Nora, or whoever she was, knew way more than she should have. I tried to tell myself it was just a series of weird coincidences, but I can't get rid of that feeling in the pit of my stomach. I'm not going back on dating apps. I'm definitely not looking for answers. There's something about that night that makes me feel like I don't want to know the truth. I don't think I'll ever figure it out, and honestly, I'm okay with that. This happened a few weeks ago, and I still can't get over it. I don't even know where to start, but I guess I'll just dive in and hope I don't sound like I'm losing my mind. So, I matched with this girl on a dating app. Her name was Grace. At first, she seemed cool, nice profile, cute pictures, the usual. We started chatting, and honestly, everything felt normal. We bonded over some dumb stuff, like how much we both hated pineapple on pizza, and how we both secretly loved those cheesy 80s rom-coms. I was having a good time, and after a couple of days of texting, we decided to meet up in person. We agreed on a local bar, a place I've been to 100 times. It was cozy, dimly lit, not too crowded. I got there a little early, grabbed a drink, and waited for her to show up. When she did, she was exactly how she looked in her pictures. Her smile was warm, and her eyes had this kind of calmness about them. We hit it off right away. We talked for hours about our families, work, even childhood memories. She had this way of making everything feel easy. By the time we finished our drinks, the place was starting to empty out. I thought it was a good time to call it a night, but she suggested we take a walk. No big deal, right? I mean, I was still enjoying the conversation, and the weather was nice, so I agreed. She led me down the street, and I assumed we were just going to walk around the block or something. But then she turned a corner, and before I knew it, we were heading towards a park. It was strange. This park wasn't anywhere near where I lived, and I didn't think I'd ever been there before. But she seemed so confident in where she was going, so I just went with it. Once we got to the park, she sat down on a bench. I sat next to her. The conversation just kept flowing, almost like we had been talking for hours, even though it was only our first date. We talked about everything, our pasts, our weirdest experiences, things that most people wouldn't even share on a first date. It felt easy, comfortable, but also, in hindsight, kind of too comfortable, if that makes sense. Anyway, hours passed. I wasn't paying attention to the time until I looked up at the sky and realized it was getting lighter. I glanced at my watch, and it was already past 5 a.m. I was starting to feel a little tired, but Grace didn't seem ready to leave. I figured she was just in the same zone I was, but when I started mentioning that I should probably get going, she didn't seem to want to let me leave. She kept saying things like, "We've only just started talking, and don't rush. We're having such a good time." I wasn't sure why, but I didn't feel like I could say no to her. I stayed. I stayed for hours. The conversation didn't slow down. It was like we were on autopilot. We were still talking like we had all the time in the world, even though it felt like I should have been asleep hours ago. And I don't know why, but I didn't leave. I didn't even question it. There was something almost hypnotic about it, like I was caught in this loop where time didn't matter anymore. Finally, when the sky was turning light blue and the sun was starting to rise, I told her I had to go home. It was crazy early and I was exhausted. She seemed a little disappointed, but agreed. We stood up, and she gave me this look, almost like she was holding back something. I walked away from the park, still half dazed from the night, trying to process what had just happened. But here's where things got weird. The next day, I woke up late, way later than I expected. When I checked my phone, I saw that I had a text from Grace. She was asking how I was doing and suggesting that we meet up again soon. I was a little surprised. I didn't remember her texting me at all after we left the park. But maybe I had just fallen asleep too fast, right? I sent a text back saying it was nice seeing her and that we should grab lunch sometime. And then I got another text from her. It was almost the same as the first one, except she said we should meet tonight at the same spot, at the same park. I thought it was a little odd, but I didn't think too much of it. Maybe she just liked the place, right? So I agreed. That night, I went back to the park, and there she was, sitting on the same bench, like nothing had changed. The weirdest part. When I sat down next to her, it was like we were picking up the conversation from where we left off. It wasn't like, "How have you been?" or anything normal like that. It was exactly like the night before, word for word. We started talking about the same things, our childhoods, our families, even the books we liked to read. But there was this strange feeling in the air like I was living in some kind of loop. I thought I was just tired, or maybe I was hallucinating or something. I wasn't sure. But when I tried to break the cycle, like talking about different topics, suggesting we walk around the block or something, it always circled back. We would always end up talking about the same things again. The conversation kept looping. The same words, the same topics, and it didn't stop. I tried to leave again, but Grace didn't let me. Every time I made a move to go, she convinced me to stay, saying we barely talked. It felt like she was controlling me somehow. I couldn't get away. No matter what I did, no matter how many times I tried to leave, I was stuck in this same conversation. It was like I had no choice but to keep talking to her, even though I was so exhausted I could barely keep my eyes open. Hours passed, and the night bled into morning again. I had no idea what time it was. It felt like I was living the same night over and over. Eventually, I managed to break free, stumbling away from the park, my head spinning. But that was just the beginning. The next night, I got another text from Grace. And guess what? She was waiting for me at the same spot, again. So this happened a while ago, and honestly, I still can't wrap my head around it. I've been hesitant to talk about it, but I think writing it down might help me make sense of it. This is one of those stories where you just feel like something is wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it until it's too late. Here's the thing: I matched with a girl on a dating app. Her name was Samantha. She seemed perfect, intelligent, funny, attractive. We hit it off right away, like seriously. We had these long conversations about everything: movies, music, books, the kind of stuff that usually takes weeks to get to know about someone. We were texting every day, and it felt effortless. I was excited to meet her. After a couple of weeks of talking, we decided to set up a date. We picked a nice little cafe downtown, somewhere quiet. The night before, I get this message from her that kind of threw me off. It was short, almost cryptic. "We've met before." At first, I thought maybe it was some inside joke or just a weird text that didn't make sense. I asked her what she meant, but she didn't answer. Just left me hanging. I figured it was probably just a typo or something, but I couldn't shake the weird feeling that something was off. The next day, I show up at the cafe and I'm already nervous, right? First dates always make me nervous, but she was so easy to talk to over text, I was excited. So she walks in, and at first, I don't think much of it. But then I saw her. And I don't know how to explain it, but it was like a punch to the stomach. Something about her face just clicked, and I knew I had seen her before. I recognized her immediately: her smile, the way she moved, the way her hair fell over her shoulder. It was also familiar. It took me a second to register what was going on, but then it hit me. This woman, Samantha, was Sarah, my ex from years ago, the one I'd broken up with after a long relationship that ended pretty badly. I hadn't heard from her since we split. I'm staring at her, trying to process everything, and I just blurted out. I'm like, you're Sarah, right? Her face drops. I can see the confusion in her eyes, and for a second I thought maybe I was just tripping. But then she just stares at me and says, "No, I'm Samantha. I've never met you before." And I'm thinking, no way. There's no way she doesn't remember me. She looked exactly like Sarah. Same eyes, same laugh, same voice. But she's denying it. At this point, I'm trying to figure out if I'm losing it or if this is some weird coincidence. I decide to let it go for the moment because she's still acting like she's never seen me before. So maybe I'm just imagining things. But as the night goes on, the weirdest thing happens. We're talking, and suddenly, I feel like I'm having flashbacks, stuff I haven't thought about in years. Like the way we used to joke about stupid things, the little habits she had that I forgot. The way she would always order the same drink when we went out, or how she would do that weird little dance when she was excited. All of it started coming back to me in waves. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As the date goes on, I start to notice something even stranger. The picture on her dating profile had changed since we first matched. The photo I saw originally was an old woman with dark hair, a little longer than the picture she was showing me. In this one, her hair was a different color, shorter, and her face was slightly different, almost like she'd intentionally altered it. I'm looking at her, comparing her to the picture, and I swear it's like I'm looking at two different people, but somehow it still feels the same. I'm trying to piece this together in my mind, but I'm just getting more confused. I start to bring up things we used to do, memories with Sarah, and she's acting like she has no idea what I'm talking about. I mention a trip we took once, a stupid argument we had over something trivial, and she just looks at me like I'm crazy. But I know her. I know it's her. I know the way she thinks, the way she acts. It's her. It has to be. By the end of the date, I'm so disoriented that I don't even know how to feel. I mean, I'm thinking maybe I'm just getting older and starting to mix things up right. But there was this nagging feeling in the back of my head telling me that no, this was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. So after the date, I get home and I decide to look at her profile again. I pull up the app, and for some reason, the first thing I notice is that her profile photo has changed again. The woman in the picture looks completely different than the one I saw at the cafe. Now, I'm seriously freaking out. I scroll through her photos, and every time I blink, the face in the picture changes. It's like I'm staring at a slideshow of different women who all kind of look similar, but not quite. I can't even keep track anymore. It's like someone's messing with me. I try to search for her profile again. Maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe I'm just making this whole thing up in my head. But it's like she disappears. Her profile's gone. Completely erased. There's no trace of her anywhere on the app. I try searching by her name, by everything, and there's nothing. I'm sitting there staring at my phone, and that's when it hits me. I have no idea what's real anymore. I can't tell if I'm losing my mind or if this whole thing was some kind of prank. But either way, I can't shake the feeling that I've just met someone who's been in my life before. Someone I was supposed to forget, but somehow she's back in my life in this completely twisted way. But it's like I can't even trust my own memories anymore. Since that night, I haven't been able to get a hold of Samantha or Sarah. I don't even know who she is anymore or if she's just messing with my head. But I swear, whatever happened, I'm not the same after meeting her. Something's off, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that I'm being followed, or that I'm just part of some weird game I can't even understand. I haven't used the dating app since, and honestly, I'm not sure if I ever will again. It feels like some part of me is stuck in this memory loop trying to figure out what's real and what isn't. I don't know if I ever want to find out the truth. I've never been the type to believe in those weird online stories you hear about all the time. You know, the ones where people talk about getting stalked through social media or having their privacy invaded by someone they met online. I always thought those were exaggerated or made up for attention. That is, until I ended up in one of those stories. It all started on this new dating app I decided to try out. It was one of those apps that promised to match you based on your interests and habits. I wasn't expecting anything serious, just a chance to meet some new people. That's where I met Riley. Her profile was cute, funny bio, some travel pics, and just enough to catch my eye without being overly scripted. Her first message was a light, flirty joke on my favorite band, and we instantly clicked. For a few days, we had a normal conversation, flirty, easy, and pretty fun. Honestly, I thought she was cool, and we seemed to be on the same wavelength. But then things started to get weird. At first, it was subtle. I'd be sitting at work, minding my own business, and suddenly my phone would buzz with a message from Riley. It was always something casual at first, like, "What are you up to today?" Or, "I bet you're bored at work, huh?" But I started noticing a pattern. Every time I'd be alone, sitting on my couch at night or grabbing a coffee during my lunch break, she'd text me. I figured it was just coincidence at first, but that couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. One day after work, I was about to hit the couch and relax with a beer. As soon as I sat down, I got a message from her. "What are you doing? I see you're home." I froze. Now, we hadn't shared anything like our address or specifics about where we lived, so I was confused. How did she know I was at home? I looked around, thinking maybe I had told her something in passing, but I couldn't remember anything that would give her that information. I brushed it off as a weird coincidence and continued chatting with her. But then things got even weirder. A few days later, it happened again. I had just finished a late night project at work and was heading to bed when my phone buzzed. It was Riley. She messaged, "I know you're alone right now." I thought it was a joke at first, but then I checked my phone and my stomach dropped. She had sent a picture of my living room. My living room, it was a shot taken from outside my window, showing the couch where I had been sitting just moments before. I didn't even know how to react. My heart started racing as I stared at the photo, my hands feeling clammy. I hadn't heard anyone outside, and there was no way she could have gotten that picture without being on my street. There were no cars around, no one walking by. I would have heard footsteps if someone had been close. But somehow she had gotten a picture of my place. It wasn't a Google image or anything that could be pulled from the internet. It was a picture from her phone, taken just a few moments ago. I couldn't breathe. I quickly shot a text asking how she got that picture, but no reply. I called, hoping for an answer, but there was no response. The silence made everything worse. She'd seen me at my most vulnerable, alone in my apartment, unaware that someone was watching. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. I blocked her immediately, thinking that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. The next day, I logged back into the app, hoping to just move on from this and pretend like it never happened. But when I opened the app, Riley's profile was still there. I expected it to be gone since I had blocked her, but nope. Though she was still active, her profile completely intact. I even checked to see if there was any way her account could have been a fake or hacked. Everything looked normal, just like it had before. But then I saw a new message notification. It read, "I'm watching." I almost dropped my phone. I stared at the screen, not knowing what to do. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind racing. How was she still able to message me if I had blocked her? And why was she acting like this? It didn't make sense. I checked the other profiles on the app, trying to distract myself, but I couldn't get the image of that photo out of my mind. I hadn't even had time to go outside and check if anyone was still lurking around. I felt like I was going crazy. The Gap was supposed to be a way to meet people, not to get stalked and terrified in my own home. I tried to block her again, but this time it didn't work. I kept receiving the same message. "I'm watching." Over and over again with new photos sometimes, always from strange angles. Taken at times when I knew I was alone. It was like she knew when I was at my weakest, when I was in the most vulnerable state. I couldn't make sense of it. After a few more attempts to delete the app and log out, Riley's profile was gone. Just vanished. I didn't get any more messages, and I felt some relief. But honestly, the silence felt just as bad. I kept wondering, where is she now? Is she still watching me? It's been weeks since that happened. I deleted the app entirely, and I haven't heard from her again. But there's something about that situation that I can't forget. The way she seemed to know everything about my life. The fact that she was there watching me when I was alone, and how I could never get away from it. It felt like I was trapped in this sick game, and no matter what I did, I couldn't escape. I still don't understand how she got that picture of my living room, or how she was able to message me after I blocked her. It's something that keeps me up at night, thinking about who might be out there, still watching, still waiting for the next time I slip up. The whole thing has left me paranoid. Every time I walk past a window now, I double check to make sure no one's standing out there. I wish I could just forget about it, but I can't. I'm not usually one for dating apps. I've always thought they were kind of sketchy, but after a string of bad dates and some friends pushing me to give it a try, I finally caved. I set up my profile with a few decent photos and a couple of lines about what I liked: hiking, cooking, and watching crime documentaries. Basically, I tried to sound interesting but not too weird. It wasn't long before I matched with a woman named Rachel. She was attractive, smart, and seemed pretty down to earth. Her messages were funny, she shared some of her interests, and we hit it off almost immediately. After chatting for a few weeks, we decided to meet up for drinks. When we met in person, I couldn't help but feel like I had seen her somewhere before. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. Maybe she looked like someone I went to college with, or maybe I'd seen her around town. Either way, I didn't think too much about it. We started talking, and the conversation flowed easily. A few drinks in, she started telling me about her life, and that's when things started to feel off. At first, it wasn't anything huge, just little inconsistencies in the stories she was telling. She mentioned she had worked at a startup for a couple of years, but the job title she gave didn't match anything she had mentioned in our earlier conversations. When I asked her more about it, she quickly brushed it off. No big deal, right? But then she said something else that made me pause. She mentioned a childhood friend, someone who used to live in the neighborhood, but I had asked her before if she was from the area, and she told me she grew up in a completely different part of the city. Then she casually dropped a detail about a family member, someone she claimed was her cousin. Again, nothing that seemed too out of the ordinary until I realized she had never mentioned any family before. The more we talked, the more confused I became. Her stories were starting to contradict themselves. Her past didn't match up with what I had thought I knew from our conversations. I tried to laugh it off, but something about the whole night didn't sit right with me. By the time we finished our drinks, I was starting to feel a little unsettled. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I walked her to her car, said goodbye, and went home. The whole evening replayed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been lied to. I decided to check out her profile again, just to see if there was anything I might have missed. When I opened the app, my stomach dropped. Her profile had completely changed. The photos were different. She wasn't wearing the same outfits. The settings were different. But it wasn't just the photos. The name on her profile was no longer Rachel. It was a completely different name. The backstory had changed too. Instead of working in tech, her bio now said she was a freelance writer, and the details about her childhood gone. The entire profile was different, as if it wasn't the same person at all. I felt a rush of panic. Had I been catfished? Was this some kind of weird scam? I scrolled through her profile a few more times, trying to make sense of it. I even checked the messages we'd exchanged, and they seemed to match the new profile. She had always been careful with what she said, never revealing too much, but enough to keep me interested. And that's when I realized something even more disturbing. Rachel, or whoever she was, wasn't just talking to me. I started looking at the list of people she was connected with, other men she had matched with, other conversations she had started. I clicked on a few profiles, and sure enough, there were men who had conversations with her that seemed to follow the same pattern. Each guy was getting the same kind of attention, the same level of care and charm, the same weird contradictions in her stories. I checked one of the other guy's profiles more closely. He had some of the same details in his conversation with Rachel that I had, and some that I didn't even remember talking about. It was like she had taken snippets from other conversations and repurposed them for me. It hit me then. I wasn't the only one. Rachel had been leading all of us on, stringing us along with the same lies, the same charming stories, the same profile that changed to fit whoever she was talking to at the time. I felt sick. I had thought Rachel was different, that we had a real connection, but in reality, I was just another guy caught up in her web of deceit. But what really shook me was the realization that this wasn't an isolated thing. I wasn't the only person she was talking to. I wasn't the only one who had been duped. I thought back to the beginning, to when we first started talking. It all seemed so normal, so casual. I never thought to question her. But now looking back, I could see the cracks forming. Her little inconsistencies, the way she would change her stories when I asked too many questions, the way she would always avoid answering certain things directly. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her? Should I report her profile to the app? What would even happen if I did? Was she just playing some weird game, or was there something more sinister going on here? I decided to send a message. I didn't ask questions. I just said that I knew what she was doing, and that was it. No response. I checked her profile again the next day, but it was gone. Completely erased. I've been thinking about it a lot since then. Every time I see someone online who looks even a little familiar, I wonder if it's her. I wonder if she's out there right now creating a new profile with a new name and a new backstory, playing some other guy into her game. I don't know what Rachel's endgame was, or if she was even real to begin with. Maybe she was just someone with too much time on her hands. Maybe she had some sick need to play with people's emotions, or maybe she was just a part of something bigger, something more twisted. But I'll never forget how it felt to realize I had been just one in a long line of victims. And I guess that's the part that gets me the most. I'll never know if I was the first or the 100th guy she did this to. I'll never know how many other people out there were caught in her web, or if anyone else even knows what she's really up to. But one thing's for sure, I'll never trust dating apps the same way again. I never thought much about dating apps. Yeah, I've heard the horror stories, but I figured it was just people overreacting or making things up for attention. At least that's what I thought until I met her, or rather until I kept meeting her. It all started with Lily. Her profile popped up one evening as I was scrolling through the app, and she caught my attention immediately. She was cute, a little quirky, and had this laid-back vibe that made it easy to start a conversation. We talked about everything: music, movies, random life stuff. And after a couple of weeks, we decided to meet in person. I remember the day clearly. It was a Saturday, perfect for a casual coffee shop date. I was excited. This was the kind of thing I had been hoping for when I joined the app. So I messaged Lily that morning confirming our plans. No reply. I figured maybe she was busy, so I didn't think much of it. I sent her a follow-up message before heading to the cafe, but still no response. When I arrived, I checked the app to see if she had maybe messaged me or canceled. That's when I realized her profile was gone. Just gone. No explanation, no warning, just a blank space where her profile used to be. I tried not to let it get to me. People back out of plans all the time, right? But I won't lie, I felt a little weird about it. I hung around for a while, hoping she'd message me to explain, but nothing. I eventually left the cafe, chalking it up to just a random flake. A couple of days later, I got a notification that Lily was back on the app. Her pictures were the same, her bio was the same. Nothing seemed off. I was a little confused, but I swiped right anyway. She matched with me almost immediately. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe she had deleted her profile for some reason or gotten a new phone. So we started talking again, picking up where we left off. We made plans for another date, this time a casual walk in the park. I was a little hesitant, but she seemed excited, and I thought maybe it was just an isolated thing. We agreed to meet the following Saturday. When the day of the date arrived, I was more than ready. I texted her that morning to confirm the time and location. No reply. So I waited and waited. Same thing as last time. I checked the app, and once again, her profile had vanished. No message, no explanation. It was like deja vu, and this time it started to feel more than a little strange. I thought I was just being paranoid, but the second disappearance left me with a gnawing feeling that I couldn't shake. I figured I'd give it another shot. Maybe there was a legitimate reason she kept disappearing. A few days later, her profile reappeared, just like before. Same photos, same bio, same everything. I swiped right again, and once again we matched. It felt almost too familiar by now. We started chatting again, and I, trying to brush off the weirdness, suggested another date. This time, I decided to get a little more specific and picked a small art gallery downtown for us to visit. Once again, the same pattern followed. The day of the date came around, I messaged her. No response. I checked the app, and there it was. Her profile was gone again. It was like I was stuck in some twisted loop. And the worst part was I couldn't figure out why. By now, I was seriously starting to question my sanity. What was going on? Was this some kind of sick joke? Why would she keep matching with me and then disappear each time we made plans? I started paying attention to the dates when this kept happening. I don't know why I hadn't thought of it before, but it was like some weird pattern was starting to emerge. The day Lily would disappear was always the same, exactly 2 weeks after the last time I saw her on the app. At first, it didn't click, but after the fourth time, it was impossible to ignore. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, Lily would come back on the app. She'd match with me, we'd start talking, and I'd suggest a date. And every time, she would disappear before the day of the date. That's when the sick feeling in my stomach turned into something much darker. I started doing some digging. I went back through the old messages, the dates when we talked, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. Lily wasn't just disappearing randomly. She was locked in this cycle, this never-ending loop where she could never meet me. I checked the other guys she matched with just to see if they had the same thing happen. They did. The dates lined up perfectly. Every single one of them had experienced the same pattern. Lily would pop up. They'd make plans, and then, just like that, she'd vanish. It was like she was stuck in some kind of purgatory, forever haunting the app, but never able to meet anyone in real life. The worst part, it wasn't just that she was disappearing. It was the fact that she was doing it on purpose, or at least it felt that way. There was no reason for her to just stop responding. She would always come back exactly when the cycle began again, acting as though nothing had happened, like we hadn't already gone through the same thing a dozen times before. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe it was some glitch in the app, or maybe there was something more sinister going on. But it started to feel like I was being toyed with, like Lily was trapped in a loop, and I was the one getting pulled along for the ride. Every 2 weeks she'd come back, and every 2 weeks I'd fall for it. It felt like I couldn't break free from her, no matter how hard I tried. Eventually, I stopped checking the app altogether, but I still get notifications from time to time, always at the same interval. Every 2 weeks I get a new message from Lily, and every time her profile is back, same pictures, same bio, same everything. I don't know what happened to her or what's going on, but the truth is I don't think I want to know anymore. There's something about that pattern, that clockwork repetition, that creeps me out more than anything else. Every 2 weeks she's there, waiting. But I don't think she's ever going to be able to meet me. Not really. And honestly, I don't think I want her to.